The faint glow of neon signs flickered against the darkening sky as Terrence parked his dusty pickup truck in front of Elliot's Tap Room, a modest bar just off Highway 74 in North Carolina. The bar wasn't anything fancy, just a staple for locals, truckers and road-weary souls looking for a cold drink and a quiet corner. Terrence, having just returned from his third overseas deployment a week ago, wanted nothing more than a moment of anonymity, a quiet transition before heading back to the relentless demands of everyday life and family expectations. He pushed open the creaky door and was greeted by a wave of chatter and the hum of an old jukebox playing Johnny Cash. Terrence scanned the room, taking in the usual crowd. A couple of regulars playing pool, a group laughing at the bar, and a few loners sipping beer in silence. He found a corner table near the back, tucked away, but with a clear view of the room. His camouflage uniform, a comfort chosen specifically for its familiar feel, blended into the dim ambience, save for the scuffed running shoes on his feet. Shoes chosen for comfort over appearance after months of heavy boots. Terrence ordered a glass of water and nursed it quietly, his thoughts drifting. He pictured the family he was finally going to see, his mother's cooking, his niece's excited voice. He was technically on leave, but the truth was his mind was still on a different continent. The silence of the bar felt loud, the stillness unnerving. He was decompressing, a process that was less about relaxing and more about forcing his focus away from the desert and back to the pine trees of home. The door slammed open, breaking his reverie. A group of 6 men strode in, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. They were older, their leather jackets emblazoned with patches and insignias that immediately announced them as a local veterans motorcycle club. They were loud, laughing and clapping each other on the back as they made their way to the bar. Terrence gave them a passing glance before returning to his drink. Just a regular Saturday night crowd, he thought. But one of the men didn't just glance back. The leader, a burly man named Hank, with a salt-and-pepper beard and piercing eyes, froze mid-laugh when he noticed Terrence. He muttered something to his group, and they all turned to look. Their laughter quieted, replaced by a simmering tension that slowly filled the room. Terrence felt their stares, but didn't acknowledge them. He'd experienced that kind of look before, the one that sized you up, judged you without context. He sipped his water, trying to focus on the jukebox instead of the growing unease that seemed to ripple through the air. At the bar, the group huddled closer, their voices low but pointed. Hank whispered something, and one of the others laughed, casting a pointed glance in Terrence's direction. Terrence kept his calm, his posture relaxed, but his senses sharp. He had learned long ago to stay composed under pressure, lessons from years of service that had nothing to do with fighting and everything to do with surviving. The night, which had started as a simple escape, was about to take a turn Terrence hadn't anticipated.
Hank's smirk curled deeper as he lunged forward, his hand reaching for Terrence's collar. His movement was clumsy, driven more by bravado and anger than skill, but it was enough to set everything in motion. Terrence didn't think, he reacted. Years of instinctual training kicked in. With a swift, precise movement, he sidestepped the grab, his body rotating just enough to evade contact. In the same fluid motion, he caught Hank's thick wrist in midair. Terrence didn't escalate the force, he merely redirected it. He rotated the man's arm behind his back, securing a control hold. Using Hank's own momentum and weight, Terrence pushed him forward, pinning him face first against the edge of the wooden table. Hank let out a strangled yelp of pain, his bravado evaporating in an instant, replaced by the deep, animalistic sound of surprise. The bar erupted in gasps and murmurs as the remaining bikers froze, their wide-eyed stares fixed on their immobilized leader. For a moment, no one moved. Terrence's voice cut through the stunned silence, low and controlled, but carrying an unmistakable authority forged in conflict. "I told you to think twice before starting something." He leaned in slightly, his grip firm but not excessive. "You don't know who you're messing with." From across the room, one of the bikers, a wiry man named Bill, took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in a half-hearted attempt to intervene. "Hey man," he stammered, "let him go. He didn't mean nothing by it." Terrence glanced up, his eyes locking onto Bill. "He came at me. You saw it." His voice was steady, unshaken by the chaos around him. "If you want him free, tell him to calm down first." The bartender, who had been silently watching with the phone in hand, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's time for you all to leave before this gets worse." But Hank, even with his arm twisted and his face pressed to the sticky table, wasn't ready to back down completely. He snarled through gritted teeth. "Call the cops! This guy just assaulted me. He's wearing a fake uniform and I want him arrested." Terrence released the hold with a controlled shove, and Hank stumbled back, clutching his arm as he turned to glare at the soldier. "You'll pay for this," he growled, his tone dripping with malice. The rest of the bikers rallied behind him, emboldened by the perceived slight against their leader. One of them pulled out a phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. "Yeah, we've got a guy here impersonating a soldier, and he just assaulted my friend." His voice was loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. Terrence stood still, his expression calm, but his mind racing. He knew how this looked, knew how quickly things could spiral out of control. His years of service, his sacrifices, everything he stood for would all hold up against their baseless accusations. He just had to stay calm. The bar was alive with murmurs now, patrons whispering among themselves and stealing sidelong glances at Terrence. Some looked uneasy, while others seemed quietly impressed by how effortlessly he'd handled the situation. Outside, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the tense air. Red and blue lights flashed against the bar's windows, casting shifting shadows across the room. The police had arrived. The doors swung open, and two officers stepped into the bar. The male officer, broad-shouldered with an unreadable expression, led the way. The other was a woman with a calm, observant demeanor. Their presence immediately silenced the room. "We got a call about an altercation," the male officer said, his voice steady but firm. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Hank, clutching his wrist and still red-faced, was the first to speak. He pointed a shaky finger at Terrence. "That guy assaulted me and he's impersonating a soldier. Look at him. He doesn't even have proper boots on." The officer's gaze shifted to Terrence, who stood quietly by his table, his posture relaxed but alert. "Is that true?" the officer asked, his tone neutral. "No, sir." Terrence shook his head slowly and met the officer's eyes. "This man and his friends confronted me because they didn't believe I'm a real soldier. When he tried to grab me, I defended myself." The female officer stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. "Did anyone witness what happened?" she asked, her voice carrying a calm authority. The bartender spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "I saw it. Hank went after him first. That soldier just reacted to protect himself. It wasn't an assault." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. One patron near the jukebox added, "Yeah, he didn't start anything. Hank's been on edge since he walked in." The male officer turned back to Terrence. "Do you have any proof of your service, sir?" Terrence nodded, keeping his movements measured as he gestured toward the duffel bag on the floor by his table. "In that bag I've got my service uniform with my name and rank. I also have my ID and my wallet. You're welcome to take a look." The officer retrieved the bag and carefully opened it, pulling out the neatly folded uniform adorned with badges and insignias. He inspected it briefly before turning to his partner, who nodded in quiet confirmation. "You're clear," the male officer said, his voice firm but respectful. "We appreciate your cooperation." Hank, still nursing his bruised pride, growled, "You're just going to take his word for it? He could have faked all that." The female officer shot Hank a sharp look. "Enough. From what I've heard, you instigated this, and you're lucky he's not pressing charges against you for assault." The words hit Hank like a slap, and his bluster began to deflate. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. "Here's how this is going to go," the male officer continued. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to pursue your claims, you're welcome to do so, but you should know that false accusations are a serious matter." Hank opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, realizing he was cornered. The officer stepped back, scanning the room one last time as the tension began to ease. The female officer turned to Terrence. "Thank you for keeping your cool. We'll make sure this is documented correctly." Terrence gave her a small nod, his composure unshaken. "Thank you, officer." The bikers began to shuffle out of the bar, their earlier bravado replaced by awkward silence. Hank, still fuming, glared at Terrence one last time before disappearing through the door. The officers followed shortly after, leaving the bar to slowly return to its usual hum of conversation. Terrence sat back down, his water untouched. The weight of the encounter lingered, but he was relieved it hadn't escalated further. Around him, the other patrons whispered and stole glances in his direction. Some looked uneasy, while others seemed quietly impressed by how effortlessly he'd handled the situation.
A few days later, Terrence was working on his old pickup truck in the driveway of his small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as he tightened a bolt under the hood. The memory of the bar incident lingered, not because of the confrontation itself, he had faced worse in combat, but because of what it represented. It wasn't the first time someone had judged him unfairly, and he doubted it would be the last. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned to see a motorcycle rolling into the driveway. The rider was one of the men from the bar, the wiry guy he recognized as Bill, one of Hank's crew. Bill cut the engine and dismounted, removing his helmet. His posture was cautious, almost apologetic, as if he were approaching a stray dog he didn't want to startle. "Terrence, right?" Bill asked, his voice quiet. Terrence nodded, but didn't speak, waiting to see where this was going. Bill cleared his throat and stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. I wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar." Terrence raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely convinced. "You were part of it," he said evenly. Bill nodded, his face flushing with guilt. "I know. I didn't stop it, and I should have. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, and I went along with it. But that doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I just wanted to tell you that." Terrence studied Bill for a moment. The man's discomfort was evident, but so was his sincerity. "Why now?" Terrence asked, his tone steady. Sure against my truck and crossed his arms. "I appreciate you coming here. It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." Bill nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Bill mounted his bike and started the engine, he watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The incident at the bar had been an ugly reminder of the prejudice he still faced, but Bill's apology was a glimmer of hope, a small but meaningful step toward understanding. He realized his power didn't come from his rank or his uniform, but from his ability to hold his ground without losing his dignity, forcing others to confront their own biases. Terrence turned back to his truck, wiping his hands again as he reflected on what had unfolded over the past few days. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't alone in it. The choices he made, the way he carried himself, could shift perspectives one person at a time. The evening air was calm as he finished his work, the quiet punctuated by the distant hum of cicadas. Terrence felt a sense of resolve, not just to keep moving forward, but to face the world with the same strength and integrity that had carried him through his service. Sometimes the battles weren't fought overseas. Sometimes they were fought right here, in bars, in homes, and in hearts. And as far as Terrence was concerned, those battles mattered just as much. He had come home seeking peace, and by refusing to lower himself to the level of his aggressors, he had finally found a quiet piece of it.